Let's look at Matthew 24:30 through 31 to determine whether the various comments should be taken in a plain sense or as figurative sense. The text reads, here are these things that must be symbolic, we're told. But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory, and he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will be gathered together, his elect from the four winds, from the end of the sky to the other. Now, if the reference to darkening of the sun and the moon and falling of the stars are figures, one might be able to argue reasonably that they might fit into the actual fall of Jerusalem. That is, if they're all symbolic, then it's up to you to decide which portion of the Josephine account refers to it. Just make it up as you go. On the other hand, if you cannot argue symbolically here, then you've got to come up with some statements out of Josephus' works that show the sun not giving us light, the moon not giving us light, the stars falling from the sky, and obviously none of those occur in Josephus. And why then have they gone from literal to figurative? Because Josephus ran out of words. He should have been talking about these things. You know why he didn't? Because they didn't occur. On the other hand, if these are non-figurative events, no record of Josephus supports such phenomena, as they surely would have if he had seen these things. He had said something about it. Matter of fact, he had said more about these things than the others because they're more spectacular. Is it contrary to common sense or rational language to believe that the sun could be darkened? I've got to make that symbolic because how could the sun ever be darkened? Oh, okay. If the sun did not shine, is it reasonable to believe that the moon, as a reflection of the sun, would not provide light? Have stars, here clearly comets or meteors, ever fallen from the sky before? Could these types of phenomena rightly be called a shaking of the heavens? I fail to see why such descriptions should be seen in any other way than actual physical and literal events. In other words, I can't see this dichotomy between the others being absolutely have to be literal, and Josephus even mentions them, in some obscure, obtuse way, and yet these others, which to me are no more, unbelievable as far as literal events, are somehow symbolic because Josephus never speaks about them. Thomas Ice presents a study of the figurative references to the sun out of 164 and concludes that nothing in Matthew 24 leads toward a figurative usage. I think he found 4 examples of that might be considered maybe figurative in all those 164. We're all familiar with eclipses of the sun and the moon, not to mention the language possibilities speaking of clouds or particles in the air so dense that the light could not penetrate. And meteor showers and comets have been spoken of in ancient and modern sources, even by Josephus. Yet none of that possible description is found in Josephus regarding what is described in these verses. Now, when you go on to look at, I'm going to go ahead and move past this down to the next section, and that's false Christ and false worship, looking at my time. These are 2 areas that become important when you look at the question of Josephus. Does Josephus discuss false Christ, and does he talk about the abomination of desolation? And this is an area that we could actually write many, many more pages, but we'll just cover a little bit here. The coming of false Christ is the first in a list of several signs of his coming and the end of the age. This and the subsequent signs is in response to 2 questions. What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? The answer to their first question, namely, tell us what will these things happen, when will these things happen, was in response to Jesus' reaction to the disciples' admiration of the temple building. False messiahs preceded the birth of Jesus, were contemporaneous with him, and also arose after the ascension of Jesus. I think you could argue that that might be the case. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, of pretenders since the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. And I've made a statement here from one of my works that you can look at, and I'm not going to quote myself here. But essentially, we have the fact that Bar Kokhba, recognized by Rabbi Akiva as being the Messiah, starts a whole line of messiahs over the many centuries from the time of this event in the first portion of the 2nd century. There's a new book coming out by a friend of mine, a professor on messiahs in the ancient, from the time of the Old Testament all the way to the modern era. And there have been literally thousands of messiahs. He's got a big encyclopedia of all of them and who they were and when and all this. And you can find many people that want to be at least some kind of messiah. But my issue here is not whether there may be individuals who have some kind of messianic complex or declared by their followers as being some kind of a messiah or not. The issue is whether you really do have a situation between AD 33 and the leaving of Jesus and the fall of Jerusalem as having anyone who is really the Messiah. Now, you need that to have happened in order to fulfill the preterist perspective. The difficulty with that is that you start looking for someone who's declared to be Messiah. And even though I do think you find some people to be called false prophets, for sure. And we mentioned some people here, an Egyptian, Theudas, and others who are rebels and so forth. But do you ever have anyone who really is looking like someone who is a Messiah, an Antichrist kind of figure? And what's interesting is that I don't find anybody who would fit that bill between AD 33 and 70. I do find some people that clearly were followed because they promised relief from Rome's domination. You do find some who are called false prophets. But it's really with the time of Bar Kokhba in AD 132, 60 years after Jerusalem fell, that you have the first real Messiah come to the fore. So I think that Thomas Ice is essentially correct in his statements on this point, although I recognize that there is some difference of opinion on that. Now, abomination in the holy place, just to sort of finish some things off here. Does Josephus discuss the idea of the abomination that Jesus is talking about in Daniel? Now, let me say right up front that Josephus does mention this, and that could serve a study all on its own. But having said that, Josephus never relates it to what preterists relate it to. He talks about the Daniel passage and that there is this idea of abomination, but Josephus never connects that with the desecration of the Temple Mount by the Romans. And this is exactly the thing that preterists try to do, because they have either the Roman army standing across from the Temple Mount as being a desecration, or the Roman army destroying the temple as being a desecration. And then you try to figure out, but does that in any way satisfy what Josephus is discussing? And the answer is no. And is that in any way what we see in the Daniel text or in what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 24? In other words, you don't see the abomination of desolation occurring in the destruction of Jerusalem. That's the point. You have to have a very, very, very fertile and vivid imagination to get to that particular conclusion. And I'm not going to go into that. I do quote Lightfoot, who has an entertaining view. He says the wing as used in the Hebrew, and also the Septuagint when he speaks about the wing of the abomination of desolation, where he says that refers to the Roman army. And I haven't figured out how wing gets the Roman army yet. But I looked at the Hebrew. It actually says like the edge of, like the location of a structure. And I can't figure out how wing means Roman army. So I think that I know that, but it doesn't come. It doesn't come because a wing, I guess you could argue eagles have wings, but I looked at the Hebrew word, and the Hebrew word doesn't provide for eagle. So even if you have that, I don't find that you have a fulfillment of that. Let me go to conclusion, and I'm going to have time for questions. And my conclusion is very short because I decided not to write anymore. I thought this was enough for one time. Preterists offer a number of obscure, exaggerated, and generalized alleged fulfillments of the words of Jesus in the fall of Jerusalem. Supposedly, the writings of Josephus, particularly the Jewish War, offer strong comparisons with the words of Jesus, demonstrating that the destruction of Jerusalem is the primary fulfillment of the Olivet Discourse found in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. My reading of Josephus and the Olivet Discourse, other than in Luke's Gospel, finds virtually no connection between these accounts and is merely a fabrication of predisposed minds to a preterist interpretation of eschatology. Thank you.